Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, the CEO of FIDIC, and welcome to our State of the World webinar. This time we are talking about net zero. What is next? So the issue is we've had the opportunity to have so many webinars recently, and today is actually quite important. A week after before the COP26, a week before the COP26. Means that we have an interesting discussion. This is actually well planned, that it isn't an accident, that we need to go into the COP26 in advance. So if I look at this, we've had an increasing unpredicted weather worldwide. We've had issues to do with fire or water everywhere. And we do know the IPCC did bring up their report. Energy transition is something that we talked about. The issue about United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 2030 or 2050, a net zero agenda is there. The challenge we have is how many people is buying into the whole concept of net zero. I understand, up until about March this year, 30% of the world is saying supportive. Now up to 80% are saying yes. We're moving into COP26 next week. And the issue, I heard last week that Saudi Arabia has decided 2060 is their target. Then I asked the real question, can we really achieve the change that we want at COP26? So today, FIDIC is actually releasing its net zero state of the world report, which I think is well timely. And we have the opportunity to actually listen to a lot of panel speakers to share their thoughts on the subject. Without further ado, I'm going to give you a very quick background as to where we are. So far, in the last 18 months, we've done over 45 webinars. We have 35,000 people that registered for it. We've had 29,000 people that actually attended this session, which is fantastic, from 150 countries. And I believe, this is what I hear, and this is factual, that over 33,000 people have watched our program on YouTube. This is fantastic. It means that we are connecting. So what does this mean? I mean, the need to consolidate and consistent approach is very important. Climate change is here, and SDG agenda is here, net zero. We cannot walk away from it. We are all collectively responsible. We've introduced, FIDIC for Global Goals. This campaign and branding will put together all FIDIC activity on climate change. So we will be launching our chapter, which is the climate change chapter next week. I believe if it's not next week, in 2 weeks' time, I'm sure Graham will correct me later on. We're looking at a number of events that we need to stage over the next period of 2 weeks over the COP26. We are going to see our activity talking to leaders around the world to gain their view on their subject and what they are doing in their organization to make sure FIDIC is at the heart of the conversation. Yes, the net zero agenda is here to stay, and we will continue to work on that. Next slide, please. So moving forward, you will have probably find out, we've talked quite a lot on our FIDIC committee webinars, and the next one is coming up on 16th of November. I believe we'll be looking at the IFI committee, which is what the banks are doing. This subject of net zero will come up. We are continuing with our State of the World report. The next one will be 24th of February, where we're looking at digital transformation. What is the next challenge? And of course, our user contract users conference is coming up between 7th and 9th of December. And guess what? And in between that, we have a board meeting. Talking about board meeting, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce once again our president all the way from Australia. I think he's getting used to this now. He's really getting used to it now. Tony Barry, to take the floor and set the scene for this particular webinar. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. Welcome to you all, wherever you are in the world. I hope you enjoy and find this webinar informative and useful to you in your work. I thank the Secretariat for organising the webinars and, most importantly, the team who's put together this report. Very important piece of work and really challenges some of the thinking we have. It's very clearly evident in the IPCC AR6 report that we have been too slow in the world to reduce climate changing gas emissions. We are now facing a very short period of time in which to achieve this. And in moving into COP26, we're in a situation where our political leaders still cannot agree or have not agreed on what needs to be done or the urgency with which it needs to be done. We're also well behind our target of achieving the UN SDGs by 2030. So how do we accelerate decarbonisation? How do we accelerate our approach to these things in such a way that we can achieve the change we need to? It's time for a change in our strategic response. Those countries, industries and companies that can go fast will need to. And they'll need to act far more quickly than those that are in the slow lane. That's something to do with capability. It's something to do with commitment. It's something to do with tensions and political challenges in each of these sovereign nations. But as engineers, we work across the globe. We have the skills and the capability to help our politicians achieve the goals that they're talking about in a few weeks' time. To me, it's a great opportunity for FIDIC, for its member associations, for the firms involved, to really start to contribute to decarbonisation and to reduce other greenhouse gases that we're dealing with. We are going to publish a climate charter for FIDIC, as has been discussed. And we also need to recognise that in what we're doing, it's taken since Paris, it's almost taken 5 years, and we still do not have enough of a commitment yet to achieve the changes we're looking for. So again, those that can go fast must. And I believe engineers are in a very unique position to make that happen and to give people, communities, give governments the confidence to take this on and know we can succeed without harming the economy, without depleting resources, and without causing harm unintentionally. So great opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to hearing our speakers tonight take on this subject. And I thank again everybody who's been involved to date, and thank our speakers for presenting to us tonight. Back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Tony, for that warm welcome. I think you set the scene really, time for a change. So the journey so far, I think it's important that we put things into context. Some of you are familiar with the State of the World report. We've done so many this year, haven't had nearly 5 years break. In one stroke this year, this is our 5th one. We started with time to invest, and I think we're talking about we now need 7 trillion a year, and we get there in 9 years to achieve 2030, debatable. We looked at the issue about the value of water, and that was critical. Then we start looking at how do we tackle the global water crisis. Then last one, we look at the sustainability community in the post-COVID world. And now we're looking at net zero. So we are going in the right trajectory in terms of looking at this state of the world. And they're meant to be a thought leadership piece for you and the industry to look at it and to take it forward. Next slide, please. So where do we stand? Will COP26 result in a significant improvement in commitment towards net zero? This is the question. Will COP26 result in significant improvement in commitment towards achieving net zero? This is time to get everybody involved in participating at this particular webinar. I want to start by asking you to vote. Do you think COP26 will result in a significant improvement in commitment? I hope so. I hope so. But let's ask the audience and see what they think. Time to vote. So Barbara, I suspect, in the second or two, you give us the feedback. This is really challenging. Yes, get 73% say it will have significant improvement in commitment towards net zero. I did say this earlier on. I was told by the president who are responsible for the net zero program that earlier this year it was only 30% of the world that was supportive. Now we got 80%. So this is encouraging. So I hear the president say, time for a change, time for us to make impact. So let's hope that we're going to get a positive outcome of COP26. So without further ado, my job really is to orchestrate this meeting. Now I'm going to invite Graham, who is our head of economic and strategy policy, who has been behind this paper. Now this paper is put together through collective strength of our stakeholder, particularly our Sustainability Development Committee, and also our future leader and panel experts from the industry. So Graham, without further ado, can you give us a big highlight of the report, and then we will dive into the report in a minute. Graham, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Yes, so I mean, as has been mentioned by Tony and Nelson, the challenge we face is becoming more and more evident day by day. The IPCC report has made it quite clear that we are not on target to meet the Paris Agreement, and that the implications of this are already starting to take effect and will continue to take effect for generations to come if action is not taken. So FIDIC, as part of this process, we talk about in this report net zero, which is obviously linked to carbon, but we also introduce potentially something else, which is a target where we need to look further. So the way I'll do this is I'll go through about some setting the scene first, talk about, just remind ourselves of the investment need, and then I'll go through the things in the report. So we'll start with my favourite part, which is always running down the clock. So we've got 2,986 days until 2030. 20% of those are weekends. If we have another year of COVID, which is restricting people, in reality, we've got 2,024 days to meet this challenge, which is not a lot of time, and it is reducing day by day, quite literally day by day. If we look at the context in which that is in, by 2100, we're looking at potentially having in excess of 12 billion people on the planet. And if we look at commitments at the moment, whilst they are going in a positive direction, which is good, we have effectively 136 countries with a combined population of over 5 billion that have turned around and made commitments. Only about 20% of those actually have plans in place to meet them, though. Companies have been somewhat more ambitious. If you do looking around, there are about 419 companies we could identify, of which half of these actually have published targets, but significantly, a majority of them, or a small majority of them, are actually planning to go faster than the 2050 net zero date. So you can see that the SDCs in 2030 and the net zero agenda is picking up, and it's becoming important. Now, if we consider the SDCs, the first State of the World report this year said that, as Nelson rightly said, the challenge is 7 trillion a year. Just to meet the water part of that element is estimated to be $2.5 trillion a year of that amount. And then if you continue that post the SDGs, you could very easily see us getting into 120 trillion of spending required to turn around and hit a 2050 net zero target. So we asked the question in this report, how easy is it going to be there? And we run several scenarios in it. So we run one where you have consistent improvement each year up to 2050. You have one where you get an improvement that continues every year and improves, but then is capped at a certain level because there's only so fast people will go. And then you've got a staged rate where every 5 or 10 years, depending upon the scenario, you have, if you like, a set level of improvement, because this accounts for the fact that investments in buildings and things don't happen on necessarily an annual basis. It's more of a business cycle. So the idea is it plans to take account of business investment. It plans to take account of the fact that when you get near net zero, it becomes marginally more difficult to meet it. Now, importantly, what this shows is that several of the scenarios show that you can hit net zero by 2045 if you turn around and you have the right profile. So we consider in this report net zero as actually, it is possible that we can go faster, and it is demonstrated by companies and by those around the globe that actually there are already people going faster. So those who can should. If we then introduce in the report the concept of net resource, we asked that actually we now don't just consider net carbon for 2050, and we say we possibly could bring that forward to 2045, but in line with that, we should have a net resource target. There's no point in meeting net zero carbon and only focusing on carbon by 2045 if we use all of the rare earth minerals in the world to actually meet that target. And renewables by composition actually use more rare earth minerals to develop than actually carbon-based solutions. So it is something we do have to consider going forward. So as part of the report, FIDIC actually suggests that there should be a 2060 target for a net resource type thing where we consider elements outside of just carbon. Now, the reason it's important to set such targets now is that targets have to be relatively simple to communicate. They also set expectations of people and behaviours. It's no good waiting to 2050 to set a 2060 target. If you're going to change behaviours and change the way that we plan infrastructure and how we take action, it needs to happen sooner rather than later so that we know what we're aiming for. The idea is that these two targets also work together with resource and net zero. So that is broadly where the report says, and I mean, you'll see in there, this started from the science back in 1824 through most of the actual carbon targets and the need for change seen in 1979, and we're now up in 2020. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 30 years bring. So with that, I'll hand over to Nelson and the panel.
Well, thank you very much, Graham, for that introduction. Just for the avoidance of doubt, my understanding is right now, as we speak, the report is officially available on our website. And just to try to recap before I introduce the panel, there are 3 or 4 recommendations, and those recommendations are quite important. Over and above that, the 2 key ones, which is some people are going faster, and why can we achieve 2045? And where does the net resources fit into that? Can we look at that in isolation, or should we be setting a new target now? And if it is, then should that target be 2060? Should we be looking at that? So I'm really delighted that in addition to Tony Barry, our president, I've got Denise Bower from Mott MacDonald, UK with us. I've got Jose Aparicio from Mexico. Jose, thank you very much for getting up early in the morning. And I've got Idris, not too far from Paris here. I've got Peter Guthrie from UK and Colin from, I believe, in Uganda. So we have quite a number of people here to help us to move into the conversation. The way we're going to take the conversation is very simple. Each panel is being given opportunity to actually reflect on the report. And we've got questions that I want to put across to them. And I do believe, having listened to the background information, that we've got people from United States all the way around the world. And if you look through the chat room, you see people from Indonesia, from China, so for everybody. We do have a glimpse of people from all over the world. So hopefully the conversation will be rich and will be deep, and we'll actually move forward in a very structured manner. So I'm going to start off with Denise. Denise, you work for McDonald's. My understanding is that, the report shows that companies are currently moving faster than the government can be. Denise, would you be able to share your view? Do you think that will have issue with the companies achieving much quicker, of the target than the government side? Do you think the company will achieve a quicker, conversion to net zero than government? Denise, what's your take on the subject?
Oh, Nelson, thank you for asking me to join you today. Look, we really welcome the report that you've literally just published, haven't you? It's a really helpful contribution to the debate on climate change, giving another and a fresh perspective. Because climate change, I think, as we've established, is one of humanity's absolutely greatest and most urgent challenges. Thanks to Graham for getting the clock countdown reminder there pretty early on. And the need to accelerate, therefore, has never been greater, because there are massive risks, but also great opportunities to create a better world. So to succeed, we think at Mott MacDonald, we've got to transform our social and economic infrastructure, our built and natural environments. Now, let's not forget the natural environment, the resource point, and the systems that underpin society to cut emissions as far and as fast as possible. And to do that, we're going to have to use innovative new digital solutions, adopt circular business models, as well as the resource model, which Graham was talking about. And we've got to place that really great emphasis on reuse and elimination of waste to build resilience to the impacts of a changing climate. So to your question about companies going faster than governments, and does that matter? Well, in our view, net zero will only be achieved if governments, the private sector and societies all move together. I think we've got to be aligned in that direction of travel. And we do fully support the ambitious timescales that Graham was mentioning some organisations have. But it's also important that those commitments are genuine and achievable. So in the case of Mott MacDonald, we're committed to achieving net zero by 2040. And that does encompass all of our full international business and our supply chain. Our emphasis now is on deep emissions reductions in line with the science-based targets. We are already, as a number of you on the call know, carbon neutral, but for a global business with a complex supply chain, meeting that 2040 target is extremely challenging to do that properly. So we will do everything we can to achieve it earlier, and we're considering whether we can bring the date forward. But we would rather that we commit to a genuine and achievable target by 2040 than to an earlier timescale that isn't. And I think that for me is true across all of those different players in this space, Nelson.
But Denise, I'm really pleased to hear the like of Mott are setting the target of 2040. So the idea of 2045 means it's actually even more achievable. If everybody is following the same path that Mott is doing, that is great thing. Now, I know that you put a plug in there that you're going to be in COP26 next week. I'll be too. I don't know how you managed to get a hotel there, but somehow Mott is planning ahead of the game. I understand it's £750 to get a hotel in Glasgow. So the question I was going to put across to you, Denise, is if we need to think beyond just the net zero, and we talk about the net resources, which was the point that Graham was talking about there. And the target of 2060 is being set. Do you think the company can play a key role in playing this? Because this starts to talk into a different language altogether, whereby we're looking at, what I talk about, the way the society live and operate in the near future. So where does net zero fit in? Where can the company help to push that agenda higher rather than just purely net zero?
Okay, so net resource is a really interesting concept, Nelson, and does deserve really serious consideration. We absolutely agree on the need to address resource use and adopt circular economy thinking. And absolutely, as professional engineers, we think we've got a particular responsibility because 7% of global carbon emissions are from concrete alone. Just think about that and what duty we have as engineers to be designing out as far as reasonably practicable. So by incorporating circular economy thinking from the outset of a project, there's a great opportunity to deliver both better outcomes and savings to our clients over the whole project life. After all, as we've demonstrated previously, embodied carbon ultimately represents embodied cost. I just wanted to mention PAS 2080. It's a carbon management standard for infrastructure, which is being used ever more widely. We helped to develop it originally, and we're updating it right now. And if you take a look, PAS 2080 represents a hierarchy of carbon reduction options. So there's build nothing, there's build less, build smart, build efficiently. From all of that, it's clear that the greatest potential for impact is at the early design and procurement stages. So really supportive of your net resource concept. I think it's really, really interesting, but would also encourage reflection on sort of wider adoption of PAS 2080.
Denise, thank you very much for that. Because I think the point is, I always raise this issue that if we talk about, circular economy is very, very important, because we can't take one and ignore the other. We need to take a holistic issue. So I'm going to come back to you later, Denise. You still haven't told me how you get your tail, but I will come back to you on that issue. So I'm going to go across now into Peter. I think I'm going to go to Jose. Jose, I know that it's too early for you in Mexico, but I hear that as Siemens Energy, and congratulations on your elevation in that role. The last time we were in Mexico together, we were speaking at FIDIC conference. So I'm really delighted that things has moved on in that. In your contribution, you talk about emphasis on the 3 key points which we looked at. And so can you go into these 3 key points that you talk about as important in terms of the net zero? I just want to know from your position, Jose, because Siemens is quite a big player in the global industry on the energy side, whether it's in transportation or all sorts of things. What are the 3 key points that you want to raise and share with us? Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And again, thank you to FIDIC for the invitation. As you mentioned, when we look from our perspective, from the company perspective, you have to measure data. If you can measure, you can manage. That's the first element. And we see some very interesting ways forward. We're looking at how the EU taxonomy has been implemented. One of the first steps, I think, on policymakers that are moving forward. Second, also is the EU proposal for corporate sustainability reporting directives, which also will bring together the financials and non-financial data. And that's extremely important for us. And second point is innovation is a basis of the future. We need to innovate, we need to bring new technologies, and I will extend a little bit more on this. We in Siemens Energy are focused in what we call our energy of tomorrow, which is based on 5 specific technologies: the power to X, is the utilization of hydrogen or clean hydrogen, energy storage as part of the overall system, electrical system, the decarbonization of heat and industrial processes, the condition-based service intervention, just to take advantage and maintain the systems in a more faster way, and of course, a resilient grid and reliability. There's a number of other technologies that we see that are part of the core, from additive manufacturing, power electronics, data analytics, very important. Intelligence augmentation is another element that we see as a part of our technology requirements. New materials, engineering methods. Digital twin is something that we're utilizing quite a bit, as well as augmented, virtual, and mixed realities. plant automation as something very critical, cybersecurity, if we want to maintain the security of our system. And third is cross-sector collaboration. The past year, I mean, we're seeing now a more interest. The report from FIDIC is one example of what's going on. COP26 coming up, but I think we need to keep two things in mind. Subsidies are excellent; they can trigger innovative and initiative, but they will not help us in the transition. Second, the declaration of intent, and I think it's already been mentioned, is not enough. We need to, above everything, we need to really act, improve our processes, be more fast in what we do. At the beginning, Tony mentioned that speed is essential. We need to attract the capital. We need to create the business models and the legal framework that is necessary. The role of politics, we should not underestimate. But the role of companies, the associate of FIDIC and the engineering firm, we need to enter into multi-global partnerships. We need to modernize conventional technologies, really to do the transition. We cannot jump from one side to the other. And finally, we need to develop more innovative and new technology in the green aspect, on the green areas.
Well, you know, what I hear from you is data is important. Somebody said to me the other day, they say data is going to be the new gold. The question is, how do we mine the data? How do we use the data? And you talk about issue about innovation and collaboration, and then on top of that, don't ignore the politics. Politics is very important. We cannot ignore the politics. We do that at our peril. Now, question I was going to put across to you, I gather, this is what my intelligence tells me, that Simony is definitely on target for 2030. What do you need to do to make sure you don't miss the 2030? What do you need to do as a company? I know you are at the cutting edge of technology. The last time you and I were talking about, you talk about e-fuel, you talk about hydrogen, you talk about carbon capturing, all these big subjects. What do you need to do as a company, as a global player, so that you don't miss the target of 2030?
But you know, Nelson, this is also a very important question, because we cannot see only from what we do as a company. I think we need to look at it in three areas. We're setting the pace and technology changes, as you mentioned. One of the areas that is very important is gas turbines, for example. Where today our new gas turbines can run up to 30% on hydrogen by 2030. The goal is that they run on 100% hydrogen. That's one area. I mentioned the transmissions. I mean, we're looking at DC transmission to reduce losses by 50% on high voltage DC lines. Reducing SF6 in some of our products. Because that's another important, we talk about CO2, but we also need to talk about all the gases. And we need to work together with companies to really create a roadmap. That will be one area. The other important area, and when we look at CO2 emissions, we know that 50% of emissions are on the supply chain, both in the upstream and downstream. Therefore, from our company, we work on almost 30,000 different suppliers around 120 different countries. Therefore, what we are working also is providing them our sustainability supply chain brochures, as well as our code of conduct brochures. I think that's important in the overall scheme. And you know, from our perspective, from our own company, we're focusing by 2030 our operations to be climate neutral. We are also basing this on a reduction of 28% on basis of 2019, meeting 100% of the Siemens Energy locations with renewable energy, reducing energy consumption by improving our efficiency of our processes. As I mentioned before, SF6 reduction in our blue portfolio of our equipment. And one of the last areas, implement the low carbon mobility concept for our employees. We're changing the way we work more into the remote, but all this in combination are what we feel are a contribution to achieve the net zero.
What I'm hearing from you, Jose, is that there's a lot that we need to do, but it's a collective responsibility. It's not just the company, but also the supply chain and everybody in the loop. Now, I'm going to call you back later, Jose. At this point in time, I would like to bring in just from Idris, Cadre, for Associate Director Novisha from France. And the question I have for Idris, I know you've been involved, you are actually a key member of our, Sustainability Development Committee. Idris, your point on this issue, what do you want to share with us? Meeting net zero will require continued measurement and benchmarking at the current method of measurement and reporting sufficient. Are we reporting sufficient? I know Jose talked about data. If we don't know the data, what are we reporting against? So what is your check on that? Idris, are we reporting sufficiently on the data, or do we have significant room to go? Idris.
Yes, we could speak about data directly, but just I would like to thank you for this initiative and the report which was compiled and done by Graham. So having said that, I have to say that yes, the assessment of the situation is the first step, because it helps to understand what are the quantities, where are the emissions, are there CO2 emissions, or are there other GHG emissions? Like Jose was saying, it can be also SF6. And after this assessment, what is important is to set a plan. And the plan can be, I would say, in a continual improvement manner. And this is what have been done, I would say, during some decades, for example, with the standard ISO 14001. But currently, it is true that with these climate goals, that's not enough. And it is important to set up targets which are aligned with the objective. And Graham mentioned that there were 2,800 days till 2030, which is one of the intermediate date. So it is true that it's quite challenging now to align the action plan with these different dates, 2030. But in some cases also 2040 and then 2050, to have a decarbonization pathway on which everyone, I would say, could compare and have to benchmark. So it means that for a company, if the company decide to make an assessment on what is called the scope 1 and scope 2 very often. So it means that there are the direct emissions and indirect emissions related to electricity. So in this case, the company has to benchmark its activity, if possible, with a sectoral roadmap, because the situation of, for example, a company which produce equipment like Siemens is different from, for example, a company which produce cement, which was stated also by Denise Bower. And of course, it's very different also for the engineering activities, because in our activities, it's intellectual, I would say, activities. And if there is some tasks which are designing, preparing a plan, and then to support the implementation of a project, how can we assess the real impact of the activity? Are there the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which are more or less the office emissions and the transportation emissions? Or should we take into account the impact of the projects? And in this case, how can we assess what we have to do? Because if a company works only on, for example, renewable energy, it will be very different from a company which is specialized in energy efficiency. In both cases, this is a good direction, but is there a difference, and how can we assess the contribution of the engineering activities regarding these specialties? So having said that, I share the view that the targets are quite challenging. Maybe we will come back on this topic later. And maybe just to put an additional information, there are the companies, there are the projects, and we just talk about that, and also there are the states and the cities. And it is true that, for example, if we look at the different statement from these different categories of actors, for companies, there are some companies who states that they will reduce by 30% their emissions in 2030. Some others sometimes have a stronger commitment. But if we want to align if we want to align with the statement of some cities and states, sometimes it can be challenging. For example, for Glasgow City, they declared that they wanted to have a carbon neutrality, to be a net zero in 2030. And the city of Copenhagen, for example, it's 2025. So it's in 3 years. So it means that it can be quite challenging for when we look at what the cities are saying, and in some cases they are the clients of the engineering activities, and for the state is the same thing.
That's very interesting. I think the point you pick up is actually quite valid, that a lot of people are committing to different targets and you're making comparison between the cities. But what I sense to pick up from you in the benchmarking side is, yes, we need to assess what the situation is. Yes, we need to have a plan. Yes, the ISO standard is there to be followed. Target need to be set against particular, date to be delivered. And then we'll look at, this sort of issue about scope 1 and scope 2, direct and indirect. What do we need to look at that? But again, we may need to look at different sector and subsector in the cement, in the steel, and all of that to make sure we cover. But the bit that you pick up there, which is quite interesting, will be topical, which leads me to the next one. You are going to go to the COP26 in Glasgow, and I see Denise is also going, and she's telling everybody, make sure you meet together. I hope both of you are going to meet there up there.
Yes.
What do we need to do as an industry to make sure that we can be at the point of influence in the conversation? Because this is so critical. As an industry, we believe we're actually well strategic positioned to help to achieve 2030 and the 2050. Okay, and if we agree the net, the sort of net, resource of 2060, we as an industry can play. How do we get close to the table and make sure that we have an impact in the political realm? So, what's your view, very quickly in 1 minute?
Yes, what is important firstly is to share the climate goals, and it is very easy to say, but sometimes it's quite challenging. So it is important to say that there is a will to commit to these objectives. Second thing is to inform of FIDIC member associations and companies' activities, because sometimes it can be important to raise awareness about the importance of the design and the implementation of all the projects and all along the life cycle, not only after delivering the project, but also in a complete way, in order to capture this circular economy which was mentioned before, because at the end, a project or an infrastructure have to be decommissioned in some case. And for also we are involved in some side events, so it will be an occasion to provide some information on topics which are important, because we have also the biodiversity, for example, challenge, which is quite related with the climate challenge. So it means that if it is possible to raise awareness about nature-based solutions in the design of the project, for example, it could be important to be part of this evolution this year and in the coming years. And maybe the third thing I could say is to have a cross-sectoral approach, as Jose was mentioning before, in order to find the best way to have the best collaboration to find the solutions which fits to all and which make the change a reality, I would say, on each project and or on sometimes at a level of the city, because I mentioned the relations with the city and the territories.
Thank you very much, Idris. I take that point. I think you cover quite a lot there, and I'll come back to that later on. But at this point in time, I'm actually looking now that I've got, Collins coming up, but I'm going to do Peter first. Now, Peter, you are the heart of it at Cambridge University. I know you've been at this game well before we also woke up to the idea. I remember you writing the first sustainability, state of the world report for FIDIC and launching it, I think if I've got it right, in Davos. So I understand, Peter, that both university and student are the heart of this issue. Are we doing enough to engage? And are we leveraging on what the university and what the future leaders coming out? Are we leveraging enough on that? Peter, the question to you, what can we do?
Nelson, it's a pleasure to be here and to join everybody this morning. The answer is, are we doing enough? The question is, are we doing enough? The answer is definitely no. The universities are definitely not doing enough, and industry is definitely not doing enough, and governments are proving to be rather weak and have been weak with the right information for the last 20 years. And now we find ourselves in a 11th hour crisis where there is some hope that there is a change of attitude and there is some urgency. And I think COP26 may be, it certainly is an opportunity for there to be a real shift. But in terms of universities look to employers to see what they, as future employers of their universities graduates, what is required from them and what is required from them in their university courses. And employers are not doing enough to tell universities that what they want from engineering graduates particularly are graduates who have been schooled in climate science, in mitigation opportunities, in ethics, very important, and professional responsibility. And if there was more pressure from employers to universities, the courses would change more quickly. There's too much understanding, a sort of supine understanding among everybody that they're doing the best they can. And we're all doing what we do very well, but we're not doing the right things. So the university courses need to change radically. What it is to be an engineer involved in the delivery of infrastructure and the built environment globally has a much wider context than merely being good technologists. And the universities are slow to pick this up, and the employers are slow to put pressure on the universities to effect this change. We are not going to get through to 2050 with net zero if we merely optimize what we currently do. The way of life that we all currently enjoy will have to change if we are to deliver net zero. We can't do it without pain.
Peter, I think what you actually said, if I can summarize it, which I'm not pretty good at, but I'm sure you're going to correct me as a professor, is that the demand and supply side need to work together. The demand is the industry, but they're not making enough push about what they want. And the supply is actually saying, we don't know exactly what you want. We just keep giving you what we've always been giving you. And somehow, if I get it right, that there needs to be dialogue between the industry and also the university, so that the fundamental of the science and the education and the curriculum need to change so that people who are coming out are ready to help. Is that a good summation of the point you raised?
It's an A-. I mean, it's
that got me to first class, Peter. That got me to first class.
But I would say that everybody is still in a kind of daydream that we can carry on doing what we've always done, but do it slightly differently to get to net zero. That's not true, and we can no longer kid ourselves that is true. We have to build less. We have to do more with what we've got. We have to explore unexploited carbon in built infrastructure more seriously. We have to be prepared to change the business model of our economic development, and we have to be sensitive to the way in which emerging economies are allowed to bring their standards of living up to something that is acceptable, while we in the developed countries take more of the responsibility for historic action.
I think, Peter, the point you raised is quite valid. I'm just going to press a little bit now, which is very unusual. I know that you're heavily involved with the resilience agenda, which is something I know is on top of your agenda. But I'm also looking at the part of that is to create an awareness in the industry. So the question I'm going to actually put to you across is that the IPCC did say with the trajectory is not going to achieve the goal. We do know that our communication in the industry is not the best. We try, especially FIDIC is trying, and I think the MA are trying, but not good enough. The politicians are pretty good on the advocacy side. So the question is, do you think we can do more? The answer you say is yes, but how can we deal with that, particularly at the student level and also at the teaching level, because this is very critical. If you quite clearly said that the demand are not defining what they wanted, and we need to communicate to the future, how do you think we need to get that message across? Is it very much more of what we're doing, or we need to take a different play?
I think we really need to have a different conversation about what it is we want from young engineers. And I do think that if we get this education piece right, then by having a new style of graduating professionals in the built environment, we would provide the pressure that would come from the younger professionals in the industry that would drive change. And I think that is a real opportunity, which universities can see, but they don't yet have the mechanisms and they don't feel the pressure to make the changes that are necessary. And employers are, of course, all consultants and contractors are under immense pressure to deliver already on a business as usual case. So shifting to something other than business as usual is hugely pressurizing, but that's what's needed now. So we do need to not incrementally change. We need to rethink how we do this so that young graduates coming into the industries of the built environment have a very much different, more radicalized view of what is needed for climate change action.
So just to pick it out in the context, I say demand and supply, new business model, a radical shift in focus and attention, and early intervention on what we teach and how we get them out. So I'm going to go across now into Colin, which is our young one. Colin, you've been listening to what is already being said. You are part of the future leaders within FIDIC grouping of people. And I know that, your activity has been very key. You contributed and your team contributed onto that. I hear the word about 2060, net resources. I hear 2030, which is really about, can we achieve the sustainability development goal? And then 2050 is issue that is looking purely on net zero. What's your take on it, Colin? What's your take? You are the future people. What's your take on the subject? Are you still there, Colin?
Yes, I am.
Yes. I want to
yes.
hear the young view. What's your view? What's your view on the subject?
Yes, young engineers have to keep informed because they're eventually going to become the experts. And like some people usually like to say, future leaders are the fuel of most of these consultancy firms. So the commitment to net resource targets mean investigating alternative scenarios that involve design for reuse, for example, waste reduction, eco-efficiency, energy efficiency, and a lot of those things to do with recycling, carbon reduction technologies, and a possibility of behavior changes like a lot of my previous panelists have said. Now, future leaders will be required to develop and implement scale technologies. Some of these might probably not exist, like we said about radical thinking, not incremental thinking, as long as the cost of these technologies is understood beyond the short-term gains, right? So continuous learning is indeed required from the future leaders, and young engineers need to match a lot of those ambitions with what is prospected. And secondly, I would also like to say that we can have a lot of ambitions as future leaders in attaining these targets of 2060 for net resource, for example, but we have to also be aware of the resources that we have from our nurturing organizations and the geographic locations where they come from, a lot of the modalities that come with that. Where organizations do not set robust targets for carbon reduction, young engineers will probably have to be proactive and become the leaders or activists for this radical change to happen in this sector. There are poor progress categories in some regions, which are likely to be institutional structure, infrastructure, finance mechanisms of where the money is coming from to invest in these kinds of issues that we need to get that 2060 targets, for example, for net resource, and that might make the goals relatively more difficult to achieve. Yes, policy changes are going to drive the net zero commitments slower in some areas than others, but ultimately future leaders and engineers at large will bridge the fine words of these organizations, of these governments, of these policies to the concerns of the public and the practice that is actually on ground, since we're doing most of the design work, for example, in the concerns that I had talked about. So given previous performance that we've seen on the targets that have been set throughout Montreal Protocol, for example, Kyoto Protocol, and a lot of those conventions that have come up over time, I would say that we have hope to achieve all this in the time frame, but it's hope given the performance that we've had previously. And as future leaders, we are rallied behind meeting these goals, net zero and net resource targets 2060 and 2045 that have been stated previously. Back to you now, Nelson.
Okay, thanks very much, Colin. I was going to be, actually be blunt. I wouldn't say I've passed it, but I'm actually on the 6th floor now of life. What that 6th floor means, you are in the future, you are coming, and you've just advocated that we need to have a behavioral change. I think that's the message I'm getting. Is you need a holistic vision. You need to look at new technology. So what do you think? I mean, bear in mind you are a practitioner now. If you were to wind up back into going back to university and teaching young one, as Professor Peter said, that we need to have a complete issue. Let's work it. You are a practitioner now. You are what should we be teaching those young people coming out of university so that they become what I call sustainable engineer or sort of resilient engineer or what I call carbon engineer? So what do we need to teach them to actually make them right?
Well, Nelson, in my experience, you don't necessarily have to be a technological innovator to make a difference. You just need to understand what you're looking for and the seriousness of the requirement that you do so. For most infrastructure projects, for example, being implemented now, designs were finalized long before current carbon emissions were undertaken. What's more, provision may be best on societal expectations, like I've stated, many of which are unfit for a lower carbon future, for example. So the future leaders need to learn about carbon emissions. Somebody has been talking about scopes 1 and 2, waste, material reuse and efficiency, and the wider sustainability issue. So what we should be teaching is issues to do with climate change, climate responsive design, regenerative design, sustainable development, green infrastructure, and also not forgetting community and stakeholder engagement, because these are the people that we're designing these things for to change their behaviors. So they need to understand, we need to understand how we can support behavioral change and how we mesh into the net zero trends, and also not forgetting learning the management aspects of it, issues to do with project finance. They're very, very important issues to understand if you are able to make this a reality. So approaches to the climate crisis are for sure going to evolve at very high levels internationally, environmentally, and economically. And the implications for the future leaders need to be understood. We will have some incremental innovation, we will have radical innovation where we have to completely rethink the way that we've been approaching, for example, design, thinking about embodied carbon, like Denise talked about. But yes, so we have to build back better and build rather than build. So yes, we should be teaching some of those things I've highlighted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I'm going to now go back into it. So for those audience who are waiting patiently, you got roughly about 10 minutes before I start picking up questions from the floor. So I'm going to go back to Denise, who's have a full time now listening to others, and put another provocative question to Denise. So I understand, Denise, carbon reduction in service industry is difficult enough. I hear that, but construction, manufacturing, infrastructure more so. So how do we make sure we can shift behavior of not only client, but end user to demand what you need to build for the next challenge? So that's a longer-winded question. So how do we make sure we change behavior? Because I hear Colin said that we have to do behavior change. How do we do that at client level? Denise?
Thanks very much, Nelson. Peter also picked up on this sort of, we can't carry on doing what we've always been doing point, didn't he? To achieve the targets that we're all signed up to will require real behavioural change. And it's absolutely the most difficult element for this to, sorry, I still have a bit of a cold, to achieve though, isn't it? evidence would suggest that people's behaviour is most influenced by what they see other people doing, the actions and opinions of other people. So we really welcome the sort of shift in public discourse, the ongoing conversations now in the press in our sort of respective countries, and the fact that social norms in most countries are turning towards low carbon choices. People are thinking about, their personal food choices, the vehicles, the means of travelling, whether the energy they have at home is from a renewable energy source and so on. And that will inevitably influence the behaviours of clients, won't it? So if the end users are demanding that there is, electric charging points available for vehicles, renewable energy sources, etc., then that starts to shift the behaviour of clients. So I think that's going to be really important. And I think one of the things about COP26, this next couple of weeks in Glasgow, is that it does seem to be helping to move that further in the right direction. This kind of public consciousness about this sort of big event and the shift from what did Greta say, blah, 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 to action, I think was the sort of shift in tone that we were seeking from that. So as engineers, we can and should be playing a really important role in those debates, because that does influence public opinion too. And that's why I think opportunities like this are really, really important. I think there are key messages that we all have a duty to be helping to sort of bring to life for people, And at the level of projects, I think we can also play a role in influencing the decisions of clients directly. We can do that by demonstrating the benefits of decarbonisation in terms of whole life and operating costs. We can also demonstrate the benefits of reducing the need for costly retrofitting over time. Jose was talking about some of the shifts that Siemens are bringing about, and I'm sure you've looked at the sort of whole life implications of those, Jose, too. And we can harness that power of systems thinking and digital technology and artificial intelligence, again, building on some of the points that Jose was already making. These are things which are more familiar to everyday users now, aren't they? Smart energy meters at home allow you to work out whether you should turn a few more lights off, whether you should be, thinking more carefully about your own personal habits. There are apps that you can use that also help inform that decision making. So I think behavioural change will only come about through a whole raft of shifts, Nelson. There won't be any one magic lever we can pull and suddenly the choices of end users will be aligned to a net zero future. I think we all have to be alert to those opportunities and work hard to maximise them.
Thank you, Denise. I mean, I sense that, what you're saying is that we all have a role to play, and behavior change, and people tend to imitate each other. So the more that is playing the game, acting the game, the more other people feel under pressure. I sense the word peer pressure come on board. That is a, if we pressure, that works.
Absolutely. And I think education, we've heard from Peter, from Collins, from Idris, the importance of education in this, not scaring people, but educating people to make better choices. I'm also a professor at the University of Leeds still, and having been an academic for quite a number of years, I can only just kind of massively re-emphasise that need for our educational programmes in schools, at universities, to really help people as well in making those shifts and understanding the important role that they can play.
Professor Denise Bower, thank you very much. I did forget that I know you're a professor at Leeds, and I know once a professor, always a professor. So thanks for your correction. I need to plug that in. So Idris, I'm going to come back to you, and I think it's important we put things into context. I understand that the report revealed that companies' ambitions are in essence of those of government. And effectively on the next target for us, how do we think we can learn from previous targets? Because you're pretty good on benchmarking. And the question is, if the industry are doing very well compared to government, how do you think we can learn from that and actually take it more and preach it to the government to say, look, the industry are getting their act together, but you guys need to move faster on your political decision and don't just talk politics, but get on with it and do it properly. So the question raised to Idris, how can we communicate that to government and to policymakers? Idris?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it is right that we can learn from the past, and we can take the best from the past. Maybe there are three main levels, I would say. The first one is to say that there are some existing regulations and it is possible to improve the existing regulations. For example, in Europe, I don't know exactly the situation in the world, but for Europe, for example, for the buildings, the new buildings, there are 7 countries which have introduced criteria for the carbon performance, not only in operation, but all along the life cycle. So it means that it's a new step, because for 50 years, the intent was to look at energy efficiency. And now there is a second perspective which is added, which is not only energy efficiency, but also carbon performance. So we can discuss with the stakeholders and try to improve the existing regulations. And for the places where there are no regulations, of course, it is important to introduce building codes, for example, because at the world level, I have heard that it was maybe more or less 150 which has a building code, but not all the countries have a building code dealing with energy efficiency, for example. So what is important is to mainstream the knowledge and to benchmark the regulations at the world level for the topic of energy, and when possible for the topic of carbon all along the life cycle, because it implies different conditions to be applicable. Second one is to discuss also in the places where there are some standards which are developed. It can be a private standard, like with ISO, with SBTi, for example, which this morning did a webinar around their new standards for net zero, for example. So it is important to provide the best ideas which can be implemented in each project when there is the preparation of this standard. And it was mentioned behavior change, and also the skills and the education. This is a very crucial topic, because not that many people have today understanding of what is, for example, 1 gallon or 1 liter of petrol when they go to the station. They don't know if it is 1 kilo of CO2 or 10 kilos of CO2. So there is also this topic of currencies, I would say, around the GHG topics, but not only for the GHG, but also for circular economy, because not everyone knows, for example, how much waste he generates each year. So to many aspects, there are some informations which can be good to know, because it can help to improve its professional capabilities, because it is linked to the everyday life. So for this third point, I would say, if it is possible to mainstream about education and skills, it is also a very important topic.
Okay, thanks very much, Idris. I think I heard the word about benchmarking, regulation, standard, either private or public sector, showcasing, and also looking at building codes and see how we apply that in different areas. I'm going to go and pick up question from the floor in a minute, but just before I do that, I just want to put one question across, to Jose, which is, how do we increase awareness among society? Because your organization touch base with virtually every part of society in terms of energy. And the question is, I've just heard from Idris, he said, sometimes we just need to put it into the basic language to say, for this item that you've got, this is how much carbon built into the whole process. So in construction, we call it embedded carbon, or carbon that we have to take out of things. So the question is, Jose, how can we get more awareness among society in terms of energy and how do we achieve the net zero on that? Jose, very quickly.
Yes, Nelson. I think first, I fully agree with Peter. More alignment between academia and corporations is essential to move forward. I will switch calling future leaders for they are the agents of change. They can do the changes today, not tomorrow. I think it's very simple. I mean, you have to bring this to a simplistic language. Companies have to really endorse the ESGs. They have to embed it into their strategy. We have it embedded into our strategy. But I will say that employees wish to work on companies that match their values. Young talent are especially motivated on the impact the company can do on society. And I think that's an element. Customers are looking for right partners. How can the companies can help them to achieve the CO2 targets? And more and increasingly important is the investors, the stakeholders, all the stakeholders are all going in the direction. I'm very positive, we're very positive that is moving. And I think you have to make some really tough decisions in the companies. We did it last year when we said, okay, we stop our involvement in coal projects. It was a very important part of Siemens Energy. And we decided, okay, we have to stop. That is the courage. We need all to make hard decisions. And we need to believe that as we do in Siemens, sustainability means that we work on the interests of the development of our society. We are part of the society. We cannot be separate. And I said it before, and I think many of the panelists have said it, we all committed. We have to go from major speeches, really nice PowerPoints to utilize. And I think the report has that direction. We talk about a specific of the SDG, and we have to build on what we believe in every aspect of our life. We, as in Siemens Energy, is gender equality, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economics, industrial innovation, infrastructure, and climate action.
Okay, thanks very much, Jose. There's a lot of question, more of complimentary statement from the floor, if I can use that. There's a lot of complimentary statement from the floor, and it may be a case that the question is actually thrown at FIDIC, but rather than FIDIC answering the question, because I'm going to call Tony later on to speak, but I want to put it across to the panelists who are not FIDIC Day today and to have your perspective. One of the questions says, I believe that engineers are working hard to develop new technologies that reduces our environmental footprint. How can FIDIC help in terms of regulation and standard? So, you know, Jose, you are in a position of influence. And you are a big manufacturing base, whether in the transportation we need energy, whether it's a home we need energy. The question for us is, how can the like of FIDIC, you know, help you? Because if I take Peter's comment earlier on, Peter was saying, we need to look at the demand and supply side. So you are in the manufacturing side, you are in the demand side. How can we work with you to work with the university to make sure at least that the standards and the new technologies that is coming in to build a natural environment becomes the norm to help us to achieve that? What's your take on that?
Nelson, FIDIC is a bridge between this academia, real world, and the companies. Setting the standards, setting the requirements that are needed. It's a role that FIDIC can play very actively. You can set the requirements at the companies, the engineering designers, and the society is looking for. Therefore, I see FIDIC as one of the key elements to really, I wouldn't say force, but at least habilitate that the companies, everyone works together. And the report says that we're on the right track. And I think the role of FIDIC pushing academia, our companies, and the society is the triangle of success.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to put a question to the president now, because this is direct on FIDIC side of it. And it's from a gentleman or a lady, I think it's a gentleman called Vittoria Paramitiori from France, from AFG. He said, good afternoon from Paris. That's how I know it was calling from Paris. He said, one question for FIDIC. Are you planning to insert in your standard form of contract clauses relating to minimizing emission during the contract phase, design, build, operation, and maintenance, depending on the type of contract? So, Mr. President, this is a question from you. What do you think? Should we or should we not? And if we are, how are we going to deal with that?
The short answer is yes. We've already had this discussion within FIDIC, and there are already clauses in our contracts which take you to what I'll call environmental responsibility and sustainability. But we do need to go further. But I'd also make the point that there's nothing to stop every person on this call tonight walking away tomorrow and having a discussion in their work environment about what they can do with the project they're dealing with at that point in time. And that's taken us to a discussion about, goes to the comment there about carbon as a currency. There's, in the same way we use alliance contracts and so forth, and we set objectives and goals for the projects, and people are paid on the basis of the achievement of those goals. There's no reason why those goals can't include substantial goals around carbon reduction or other greenhouse gas reductions. And there's nothing to say that, in fact, you couldn't have an alliance agreement built entirely around the carbon performance of a project. So I do think that's a really important element of what FIDIC is going to do in the next little while. It'll start with our climate charter next week, and you'll see some of this in the climate charter already. But that's where we're heading.
Right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nelson.
Thanks, Tony, for that. I think, I couldn't answer it any better. There's a lot of questions. Most of them, Tony, are related to, is FIDIC going to do something on contract, and are we going to enforce that? And you've addressed it eloquently, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I suspect there's a question that's coming through the back of my mind, which is really about, yes, we know that advocacy is going to be key, powerful term, because I remember, I think if I remember what Idris said, don't forget the politician, don't forget the politics. We can do so much on the engineering and technology. For example, this concept of carbon capturing, storage system. It's been going on for quite a long time, where we know for sure, yes, we will create carbon, but how do we capture it? How do we store it? How do we store it safely in such a way that it doesn't become contaminated? So I'm going to bring Peter back in on board. Peter, the question I'm having is where we're having difficulties in taking new technology into reality from research and development. Should we be advocating and talking to the, to policy people about incentive, innovation, and creativity to ensure that new technology can be brought on board? Peter, what's your take on that?
I think there's quite a lot of enthusiasm for new technologies in the political sphere. And of course, my experience is largely confined to the UK government, who haven't been tremendous on energy policy over the last 25 years because they've never been managed to be very consistent. But a number of policy initiatives have come forward, like the carbon reduction commitment from maybe 15 or 16 years ago, which was a really innovative way of getting accountability in large carbon emitters to think very deeply about what they were going to do to reduce their emissions. And unfortunately, that scheme wasn't enacted and wasn't implemented by the government as it very definitely could have been. But on the question of technologies, it's very difficult for the politicians to be the ones who make decisions about which technology are we going to go for. There's a lot of debate, for example, in the academic community and more widely, certainly in FIDIC, about hydrogen. Is hydrogen a direction of travel that we should be going in, or is it something that's going to be too difficult to decarbonize its production? Because it's a very useful fuel when you get it, but it depends how you generate it. And the same really applies to carbon capture and storage. There's nothing at scale yet that gives us the confidence that this would be a significant solution, even when you're taking concentrated CO2 at the point of generation. And I have some sympathy with governments who are not necessarily prepared to throw too much investment at a wide range of technologies. Nuclear fusion has been 40 years away for 40 years, and it still is. And so you can understand the nervousness of politicians to align themselves with individual directions of technology. And I think it's up to the universities and industry, particularly industry, who have the significant resources to be able to provide sufficient guidance to the policymakers as to where our investment should be concentrated. And in that respect, FIDIC has a unique and that's why I'm such a strong supporter of FIDIC, has a unique role to play in being able to coordinate the views of industry internationally and to represent the broadest definition of the industry to a wide political forum.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to bring back, if possible, now Denise on this, because I think this will be helpful, because we talked about taking a holistic view, and some of the point that's coming through, and I'm getting is about where is the role of the client, particularly the MDB and the government in the procurement process. And this may be something really for industry, as in the like of Mott or other company working in collaboration with the like of FIDIC. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas in the procurement side on that. So Denise, your view on that is that how do we ensure that we talk to the client in their procurement process to make sure they build this process in their procurement, and maybe it's an opportunity for training, because if some of our member firm, and I use the word member firm because of course FIDIC represent the MA represent the member firm. If some of our member firm are doing groundbreaking ideas and they're in a position where they're actually advising the client at the procurement side, what else can we do in terms of training and capacity building that can actually help the client to understand that the procurement side is a very important part in the system to make sure at least we decarbonize our system. Denise, what's your take on that?
Thanks, Nelson. And just before I do answer that, which I promise I will, I just wanted to build on what Peter was saying, just around the new technologies, because I think the insurance industry's got a really important role to play there. And I think, you know, what I'd really like to see is the insurance industry voicing conversations like this to help sort of bridge that valley of death, because I think they can then support some fail fast approaches, which otherwise we might not be able to take. And they can also make some of these more sort of new technology major investment programs more bankable, because if we can't make them bankable, they won't get off the ground. So just wanted to shout out for the insurance industry.
Thank you very much. I very much welcome that. That's very good. And if you need to shout out on anything else, please shout out.
Will do. So back to your point on procurement. Look, this is where I think there's lots of really good practice in pockets already around pre-qualification. So, you know, as an engineering design organisation, we have to demonstrate our credentials to be at the table to play now in a way we never have before. And I'm the exec board with responsibility for sustainability and climate change at Mott MacDonald globally. And one of my, biggest worries is that our license to operate, if we cannot continue to not just demonstrate our current credentials, but keep driving forward and keep, to some extent being at the forefront with those credentials, we won't have a license to operate as a business in this space. So UK government, for example, requires us to publish our carbon footprint details, what we're doing, what actions we're taking to reduce our carbon footprint. And we really welcomed that because, if you compare it with other areas like health and safety, as somebody mentioned in the chat, like equality and diversity, I think there's a real issue of standard setting with real clarity. And then that kind of raises all the boats, doesn't it? You've got that minimum expectation. And it's not saying that people can't go further. Clients are delighted, absolutely delighted when we go further and we take them further. But we need to continue to do that. And again, another little shout out from me is that I think, we have got that resilience side of the coin, the resilience and adaptation side of the coin we have to have in mind too. And I think it's harder, isn't it? It's harder setting those expectations and standards when it comes to resilience and adaptation. But I don't think we should forget that as part of this conversation, because whatever actions we take now, there will still be temperature rises. Some of the assets we have will require adaptation. We have to bear in mind resilience when we're instigating some of our major investment programs now. So I'd like to see it for resilience and adaptation as much as for carbon mitigation and reduction.
Thanks, Denise. I know that, if you need to shout out, I'm sure you will shout out, and I expect you to shout out. But I'm actually going to shout out to the president, because there's a question here to say the RICS, which is your Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, they've actually created a standard to establish whole life cost issue on carbon assessment on the built environment. The question is, Tony, and I know you have the answer to this, that's what I'm asking you, because you've been plugging me since we had the Global Infrastructure Conference. The question is, should FIDIC develop a standard based on what World Economic Forum has done to look at the issue about, infrastructure and standard and measurement embedded in infrastructure, and then the whole life cost that comes into that. Tony, what's your quick view on that?
So first comment is there are many systems around the world that have attempted to do this, and PAS 2080 is one that's been mentioned. Interestingly, all the organisations charge a large sum of money so that you can get hold of these documents, which is a little bit of an unfortunate situation for the rest of the world. But could FIDIC play a role? Absolutely. Could we build on the work done by the World Economic Forum for companies and build that around, I'll call it projects for the moment? I think the answer to that's absolutely. And it is a lot broader than carbon, and it is ESG for projects. So I think that we have talked about it, as you've mentioned, and yes, I believe it's an initiative we can take. It's a pretty important one because it would assist, and FIDIC would be able to, as already mentioned, advocate the use of these methodologies worldwide, and that's a very powerful place to be doing it from.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Now I'm being told the time is going down, so I'm going to do my usual plug-in. And if you haven't done it before, and if you haven't experienced this, you're going to experience it. And it's very simple. I'm going to ask you for a simple sentence on two subjects, two questions in one. We are known not to be a big, public advocate of what good that comes out of our industry. And the politicians are pretty good at it. They make commitment and they go on year or election to election. So the question to my panelists, and Mr. President, I'll bring you last into it. I'm going to start off with the young one. I'm going to start with, Colin, and say, do you think we should be doing more in engaging the politicians to make sure we are really at the table? The answer should be yes or no. And if it's yes, what exactly would you be recommending we should be doing more? Is it one about more advocacy for us to be in the public domain, or should we just continue to be quiet and do what we always do? So, Colin, what's your view on that issue, public advocacy?
Yes, Nelson, I would say that policy is going to shape a lot of the direction that we are going to follow. And the stronger the policies that they make, the easier it will be for us to roll out. FIDIC is indeed doing their international forms of standard, and they are affecting infrastructure and the direction that it is going to be taking. If countries are not recognizing that, or if they're not part of their nationally determined commitments, like to what they've been doing with IPC and all, then maybe some of these changes might not be accepted in such countries. And I think it was Peter who talked about where some countries are, and they would like to reach a level of infrastructure development as the people who are in the developed world. Some of these people might be less receptive to those kinds of ideas. So politicians in such kinds of local environments would not say, I'm going to stop producing, for example, oil when I've just discovered it, for example, in my country, in Uganda, just because we have nationally determined contributions, to state, to the IPCC to achieve those net targets and all. So I would think, yes, we will follow what the politicians would say, but we need to firm up the international standards in the forms of contracts so that they become best practice, as it has been for consultants, sub-consultants, their clients, and their contractors. And once these divisions push for, and the clients push for infrastructure that is in line with net zero and net resource targets, then maybe the rest of the countries will be forced to pick up based on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin. I asked you for one sentence. You gave me 15 sentences, which are pretty good. I like that for the young one because you're busting for energy. So, Jose, what's your view? Should we be banging the drum with the policy and politicians and letting them know where we feel, or should we stay quiet? And if we should do, how best can we do that? Jose, yours on the table.
Thank you, Nelson. Absolutely a yes. FIDIC is the only constant. Politicians change. Therefore, we need to be there. We need to help them in different levels to understand what it means. Therefore, yes, we need to involve them.
Thank you. Idris, your take? I think the answer is yes. Idris, what's your take? Should we be getting closer to the politician or not, and letting them know how we feel? We can help them. No bullshitting, straight target.
Well, at least we can participate to the meetings and express a vision and some and provide some information. maybe in addition to the climate topic, we could say that it will help also to improve the air quality in the city and also the life quality. So it can meet also the expectations of not only the mayor, but also the citizens. So maybe we can also provide the co-benefit and inform on all the co-benefits related to climate action.
Thank you very much. Can I bring Peter in? Peter, I hear earlier on that Denise shouts out to the insurance people, and I know you are very much in that space. You know, should we be banging the drum with the politician and also those who are key stakeholders, such as the insurance world? Should we be doing that? Peter?
Well, the short answer is yes, but the but is that it shouldn't only be politicians. I agree very strongly with Denise's point, and maybe not just insurers, but also sovereign funds, investors, and so on, because that's where the real decisions are made. The politicians are here today, gone tomorrow, and never very impressive. So it's important that FIDIC continues to do the amazing job that it does, but it needs to work out new ways of communicating its messages. And at the risk of causing offense universally, FIDIC needs to look more and be more diverse in when it's conveying those messages to other audiences, because without the diversity that is reflected in society at large, FIDIC will not be seen for the sincerity and integrity that it can clearly demonstrate in all other aspects.
Thank you. I actually like the word you plug the word diversity, give you a shout out. We need to reflect the society that we live in. We need to embrace multidisciplinary and different culture and embrace that. That's why I'm running FIDIC. And that's why we actually have, 3 female in our board, which is a grandstand target for 2024. We achieved that in 2021. And that's why I have everything we do that we need to get diversity into that. So, thanks very much, Peter, for reminding me of that. Denise, can I bring you on board? What is it? Should we or not do?
Of course we should. And I think if we do that in a diverse way, even starting with COP next week, rather than that being our last best chance, I think it's actually our first good chance. And we need to build on that. If we do that, then I think that the absolute headlines for me have to be about the recognition of the importance of behaviour change, has to be about backing strategy with resources, and really importantly for government, it's a specific government message. In each country, identify a designated driver for this net zero journey. Too often we're left with a gap, a lack of clarity over where responsibility actually sits. So I'd love a designated driver in each country for the net zero journey, Nelson.
Thank you very much. I hope I haven't missed anybody out, because I get so excited that I'm going to call the president to give us his one or two minutes, closing statement before I wrap up. So, Tony, the floor is yours.
Closing statements. The first one from me is I would like to see everybody on this call and engineers go back into their workplaces and take some leadership in this issue, start to study what is really required to get to carbon neutral and net zero on our projects, make sure that we can drive very hard to improve things. Just for what it's worth, our 1 litre of diesel has got 720 grams of carbon in it, and it takes 1.9 kilograms of oxygen out of our atmosphere. And that's a lot of CO2, 2.7 kgs of CO2 is produced. So we've also got, and this is to Peter's point, we need to change what we're doing. We really do need leadership across all areas to do that. Does that mean engineers supporting the scientists with advocacy, with practical solutions, with giving politicians the confidence that we can go down this path successfully? The answer to that is yes. But it also means, for me, that engineers have to intensely focus on carbon reduction as a project objective, and obviously the other greenhouse gases. So to me, there's a huge opportunity for engineers to contribute here, and I believe a huge responsibility at the same time. Thank you, Nelson.
Thanks very much, Tony, for that. I couldn't put it any better. My final thought really is that it's been fantastic to have this debate. I'm glad that we are ahead of the COP. And for those who are going to COP, who's managed to get hotel at a very cheap rate ahead of the planning, and then make sure you enjoy it. But if you do get the politician, make sure you hook up to them and let them know what the engineering world is doing. I hear from Peter saying, we need to communicate in a better way, and we need to reflect the society that we live in, and we need to engage all the key players in our industry. My thought on the subject, look, COP26 will come and go, but the need for zero emission and the need for net zero will continue to be here, as Denise said, is actually the beginning of the journey, because we know by the IPCC that we are nowhere near what we should have achieved, and therefore we need to work together as an industry to make sure that we get this work. Engineers have a role to play. I hear the comment from Peter, we need to look at the demand and the supply, and Jose confirmed that FIDIC can play a key role as a catalyst. I hear the comment, it's not just purely about net zero, or it's just, sustainability development goal. We also need to look at net resources. These are all that we need to look at, and these are critical. And for me, FIDIC is playing a role. We are never complacent to assume we've done it all. In fact, the journey just started. FIDIC has never been in the advocacy business, but I'm now being charged we have to. So going forward, the state of the world is one bit. We are going to have a series of interviews on our infrastructure global to promote the COP and to make sure our industry is connected. We are going to have a dedicated website to look at what FIDIC is doing, what our industry is doing, and what industry speakers are actually doing. A lot of our firms, as we heard from Mott, Orocon, from Arab, and all of them, they're doing great things. Small Indian work, they're doing great things. We need to showcase them. So we'll continue to look at that. The COP activity side, we're going to focus on that. There will be a reflection point after the COP where we'll be looking at what does it mean. And in between that period, we're actually going to launch, as Tony said, our climate change commitment. And that commitment goes across to FIDIC as an organization. What are we doing to reduce our carbon footprint? It will go across what we can recommend to our MA, member association, what we'll be recommending to the industry, and we've just been told some of the industry are straight ahead, and also what individuals should be doing, taking responsibility, and the journey will continue. My view on it is that there's going to be quite a lot of activity, and hopefully when we get to Geneva in 2022, I genuinely said that word, Geneva 2022. Peter, you're listening to me? We'll get to Geneva 2022 because COVID-19 will come and go. I'm absolutely sure about that. So next year we're all going to be in Geneva. I'll be expecting great leaders to come together and for us to have a proper debate and set the target to make sure we move forward. So that's what's next. So going on, I really need to say massive thank you to Tony Barry, not to myself, to Peter Guthrie, and also Rowan from UNEP, and all those who contributed to this particular paper. The paper is available now. And also want to say massive thank you to all the panelists from, Denise, my good friend, Professor Denise, let me qualify that, Idris, and Jose, and Peter, and Colin, and also our president. Good evening to you, Mr. President, and thank you very much for staying late to join us. And massive thank you to all my team behind the scene, Barbara, Andy, the whole lot of them, and also our partner, which is UNEP. They're supporting us in what we're doing. If you are interested in supporting us, please don't hesitate to contact Graham, who is behind the scene. I understand there's one more poll, just last one. Are we doing enough to communicate the challenges of net zero to clients, stakeholder, and end user? Are we doing enough? And should we be doing more? I think we are doing enough, but it may be because we need to do more. So what's the view? Are we doing enough to communicate the challenges of net zero to clients, stakeholders, and end user? This was the point Jose raised earlier on. Are we doing enough? Are we doing enough? If we're not doing enough, how can we improve on that? So what's the feedback? What's the feedback? Barbara, do you have the result for me? He said, no, we're not doing enough, so we have to do more. That doesn't surprise me. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to close out to say thank you very much for all our panelists. Thank you very much for those of you who are listening to us, wherever you are, and those who are supporting, particularly the FIDIC team, Andy, Graham, Barbara, and the rest of the team, making sure I'm in the right place at the right time, then I'm talking to the right people. And wherever you are, please stay safe. Take care. God bless. Thank you very much.